Good afternoon and welcome to today's free webinar series, Maximizing Data Quality for Value and ROI. Today's webinar, CA ERwin R8.2, Advanced Reporting. This is Kevin Askew with TechXtend, and I will take you through a brief agenda today before turning things over to Victor. TechXtend has a 30-year history under former name Programmer's Paradise. We were the source and continue to be the source for developer and database tools. Under our TechXtend solutions focus, we now provide virtualization and cloud computing, storage and data management, business intelligence and information management, and mobile device management. We're a leading value-added reseller of developer and infrastructure tools. CA ERwin can be found under our database worldview ecosystem. We are an elite CA partner and the #1 data modeling reseller for CA in North America. We also have an on-staff, dedicated CA sales and engineering team. Focus on database modeling, infrastructure design, and training services. Under our database worldview, we provide industry-leading database tools for your end-to-end database infrastructure needs. And now, without any further ado, I will now turn things over to Victor. Victor?
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody, for attending. Today's topic is actually going to be kind of a repeat of an earlier topic we had, which we kind of had so many questions at that time we didn't really get to cover it fully. There's also some new resources I wanted to introduce to everybody, topic being the advanced reporting features that are available in the ERwin software. So with that, I'm going to start the presentation. Let me just make sure we are showing my slides here. And we'll start the presentation here with this introductory slide. So the agenda for today, we're going to look at some new reporting resources, some new features I want to make sure everybody's aware of as far as getting up and running with their reporting initiatives. I know there's been some pain points with migrating from earlier versions of ERwin to the 8.x versions. Some best practices that I suggest as far as how we roll this out and implement new reports. And we're going to have some demonstrations, one being building CRISA reports from available queries that come bundled with ERwin, and also kind of like an end-to-end initiative to show you how you can actually use the built-in full developer version of CRISA reports to generate queries, or generate reports, I should say, from existing queries, and the model manager reporting as well, which is available from the same CRISA report utility. And we'll have some time for questions and answers, and hopefully this will be a relatively interactive presentation and won't keep you past 5 o'clock. I know all you East Coasters are probably dying to get out of your offices on time. So the last thing I wanted to mention is, of course, feel free to put in your questions during the course of the presentation. We'll be able to get to them at the end. So just type it into the interface there, the WebEx interface, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So what reporting resources are available? So first of all, my blog, of course, I have some examples there, kind of a step-by-step instruction for some of what I'm going to present today, and that's maximumdatamodeling.blogspot.com, or just do a Google search for Maximum Data Modeling or Max Data Modeling, and you'll find me on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. Speaking of LinkedIn, another great resource, which I haven't actually listed here, but if you go to the ERwin LinkedIn group, if you join that group on LinkedIn, if you join that group or my group on LinkedIn as well, a lot of conversations going on there, a lot of communication occurring there about the reporting features and just about ERwin in general. So you kind of stay in the loop as far as what are other users experiencing in using the software, any kind of hurdles that might be occurring in migration, best practices that other users are experiencing, and of course, why reinvent the wheel? A lot of the reporting you're trying to accomplish is being done by other users. There's some new documentation that I want to talk about, and one of them is just an update to an old document that's been around for a while, and that is the this meta model reference PDF. And this was actually been around since ERwin's 7.x release, but I'm going to actually show it to you here rather than just speaking to it, because it's actually been updated with the latest release and kind of gives you some really useful information. Many users have been requesting this for a while. This is the ERwin Meta Model Reference Guide, and it simply is in your ERwin install folder in the doc folder. And this actually disappeared for a particular release of ERwin, but it's back again. And what you'll see here is that there's been the addition of an overview, of course, of the actual metadata definitions, kind of give you a good overview of how the metadata is structured. But much more importantly is this section on diagrams. So this is what a lot of users have been asking about, is actually seeing the diagrams, not only an overview of them, but the actual joins on these different tables. So for example, between entities and other items, or another example here, like a cached view, which is basically like a materialized view or a version of materialized view, to entity mapping, or further down here, a more useful diagram as well. This is like a UML version of the diagram, but here's a relational version of it, which might be easier for many to understand, which is simply showing us the joins that are available between a model, subject area, and, for example, how are these referenced to entities, how are these referenced to relationships, etc. So these different diagrams which are available here, the relationship, here's another example, between key group and entity and attribute, for example. So if you wanted to actually know, well, where do I create the joins on my reports, to create these diagrams will give you a very good idea of how to actually see the relationship between these different diagrams. Now, the entire ERwin metadata model is actually available, and I'll show you where that is. So you can actually go in there and do all your own investigation. But you'll see on many of these cases, these tables have, dozens of columns, even more than that. And usually what you really just want to see is these core group of entities, whether they're entities, attributes, relationships, etc., and then the joins between them and how they actually relate to each other for creating this within your own reports. So if you want to have a better understanding of how ERwin's metadata is defined, this is a great asset. So that's one document I want to include and want to mention, I should say, and that's right in the doc folder. The second one I want to mention is in your install. It's also in the install folder for your software. It's in a folder called Bookshelf. It's also available, by the way, from your Start menu. If you go to the install directory from your Start menu, there's actually a Bookshelf link there as well. And in the Bookshelf, there's both an HTML and PDF version of this diagram, and it's the ODBC reporting guide. And this has been there for some time, actually, and that's also available here. Let me show you where that is available. In the ODBC reporting guide, and you'll see this reporting guide gives us, it's going to cover a lot of the material I'm going to touch on here today, which is how does this reporting work within the context of a querying tool, which is a new tool inside of ERwin. How do we, how do we connect to that ODBC connection? And everything we're going to see today is how the reporting uses this ODBC connection to the native ERwin meta model to extract these reports, and then what it structure these metadata, which is defined even more granularly in that other document I showed you before. But in here, there's also really good examples. So not only do we kind of explain this is the level of the schema, but you'll see here is an actual query that we execute, and here's the results of that query. So you can get a good idea as to, how these reports actually let us generate reports against, the model metadata, or even structures within the diagram, like what are my tables, what are their attributes, definitions, etc. So this is available within here, a definition of what the schema objects are and how they relate to each other. And there's also a list of useful queries, so which can be run into the ERwin software. So we have entity definitions and notes, for example, and we see these queries. Now, where can you run these queries? That's really kind of the point of this presentation, the idea of how do we access this metadata within the reports themselves. So back into our presentation. Oh, let me go back to my slide deck. An additional reference for anybody who's having issues with reporting is this link we have here. This is a new reference for everybody out there who needs to. It's a CA ERwin community bulletin board, and anyone who hasn't visited this recently, you can actually access this from ERwin.com. ERwin.com is a great resource for anybody who has any kind of modeling initiatives, even if you're not using ERwin. But in the context of using ERwin, if you go to the main message board, you'll see that we've always had this general discussion forum here. It's been here for quite some time. There's thousands of posts here. But what you have seen here is two new subcategories. One is this reporting forum, and the other one is Tuesday's Tips. So just in general terms, the Tuesday's Tips is a weekly blog posting that the support team does over in the CA Tech support team for ERwin, and some really useful weekly tips there from the community there that you've probably, a lot of the technicians that you guys are talking to on a regular basis as it is. But also this ERwin R8 reporting forum, which is really a great asset. Not only do you have people posting requests for specific reports that they'd like to see, not only do you see other users creating those reports for one user for another, but you also see the support team going in there and generating reports as well. The nice thing about these reports, as you'll see when we go through the exercises later on, is that, of course, once you build the reports, even if they're a little painstaking, not only can you reuse them, but they're reusable for anybody in your team. So you can imagine if someone's already doing all that legwork, why not just download the files after they've been created here in the community pages and use them in the future. Or if you have a particular report you've been trying to struggle to create, why not contact the support staff? Now, I've kind of dove into the deep end of this whole thing by kind of showing you all these resources for accessing ERwin metadata. For the more casual user, if you're just initially getting used to starting using ERwin R8, there are quite a few features in the tool itself that are not as complex to actually get out of the reporting tool what you're actually hoping to accomplish. So you have the ability of generating diagram reports. You have the ability of, and that's this editor we're seeing here. And this diagram report, I'm going to show you this in just a moment, but the report that gets generated always has a certain format. It has the model name, followed by the diagram name, and then an EMF appendix. An EMF appendix, so in this example, eMovies R8, physical with views.emf. Now, the reason that it has this notation is to make sure that these files are always unique when they're being saved into your directory. And you see you can actually export to a particular folder. So let's say, for example, we're trying to generate a report that's always going to publish to a shared directory where all my users can reference it. You could create a link, maybe embed it in a SharePoint document or something like that, to this particular path where it'll always have the same standard, where we have the model name followed by the diagram name, and then the EMF appendix. The reason we want to have this continuity is so that we can publish in the future the same diagram and it will automatically refresh itself. Now, this doesn't require me to have any kind of special skill for, being able to generate a graphical report, understanding how the ERwin metadata works, that introductory topics that I brought up in the previous slides. You could generate these right natively from the ERwin editor. So let me show you how you do that. So what you can do, I'm going to actually open a model here. So actually opening a model here. This is actually a model that I built from an AdventureWorks reverse engineer. You see that I've created multiple views of it. One is this entity view. One has my definitions and identifying relationships. One has these more granular physical representation of my columns and column properties. And this is a model that I previously generated. So what I actually do here is I have the ability from the Tools menu to go and select this option for the diagram picture. Now, I can actually generate just the current picture I'm looking at, pretty straightforward, simple as just clicking on this link here. But more powerfully, I have the ability of selecting this Generate Diagram Pictures. And you see what I have here. I have this diagram that I'm looking at right now, and I have all of my stored displays, as they used to be called. Now they're called diagrams, which is just confusing because it's diagrams within diagrams. But so I continue to use them as stored displays just to differentiate them. but we can actually create them right from this editor. So this is a very simple way of being able to generate a graphical report. Now you'll see that I can actually specify any folder that I'd like to publish to. So I can actually browse to a folder, and let me see if I have something on my desktop. Let me call this, I'm going to create a new folder. Let me go and make a new folder on my desktop called Webinar Demo. And now in this folder, I'm going to publish these diagrams. And I do this simply by clicking Save. Now, the next time I come and publish this, if I need to publish again, it will automatically, within this model, I will automatically already be pointing at the this same folder. Now, the reason this is the case is this way I can always know exactly where my models are currently being published to. And what we can see when we go into this folder that I just created, on my desktop. In my webinar demo, you'll see that they have a specific notation. So for example, I selected to print out the entity tab of this display and the DBA view. So we see that the notation for the model, the way it's actually been saved off, is model1 underscore and then the particular stored display name. Now, the model name by itself, where does it come from? It comes from the model properties. It's just a generic model1. If I had given this a useful name like Adventure Works, dim RE, something that's a little more informative, then of course that would be the name that would actually be generated, and we would have this generated as part of the report. So I'm going to actually show you that briefly. If I actually go once again, and now I generate this diagram picture, select the same two views as before. Actually, I'll select all three this time, and I save it, and I go to this same folder again. That we see now that it's the standard has changed, where we have this AW, DIM, RE, DBA, and definitions and entity. Now, the reason I point this out is to show you that you have the ability of controlling not only how these documents are generated, where they get generated to, but by using good naming standards and by knowing what your model names are and like kind of standardizing along these and using a best practice of course creating model names, you can actually publish this diagram on a regular basis using a one-click interface that will be in this editor. Now, once I have these diagrams here, imagine that I can have like a wiki somewhere or a SharePoint document somewhere or any kind of document that has links to these particular diagrams. Now, my users can come here and look at the level of detail they have when they come and look at these documents. So a very simple way of publishing this web tool, or web publishing this in a very convenient way, and even, like I mentioned before, by having these standard names, having the ability of generating reports on a regular basis going forward that contain this information as well. So the ability of generating it and also to publish it on a regular basis in the future. And basically it has the same level of graphical detail that you have in your original model. So it's much more interactive and can be at any scale you'd like, much more conveniently than trying to embed an image in a Word document, for example, that will get truncated halfway in and be unreadable, or be so magnified to such a small detail that the text is unreadable. So just a much more convenient way of doing that. So this is actually my preference, is to publish this way. It allows me to publish the diagram graphically with one click, and also it allows me to refresh that image on a regular basis in the future, simply by publishing from one click from one diagram button. So that's my preferred publication method for that particular, for publishing a graphical component, the graphical view of the diagram. Now, so that's you know, how do you export this information? I briefly introduced this already. Is that, you know, now we have this additional documentation in ERwin 8.2. This is the reference document I mentioned previously. You can actually see where the joins are. So this takes us to the next topic. What happens when you know, I don't want to just have a graphical image. I actually want to generate textual reports of the metadata in my diagram. Now, there's the bulk editor, which I'll show you in just a moment, which allows me to generate these reports out to my end users. But I might want to have a formatted report that I can export to, like we probably had before in the functionality similar to what we saw in the data browser. You can still do that. We use this Crystal Reports as the interface. And it's definitely not as complicated as users often feel it is. I mean, it's a change, so that may complicate things. But I'm going to show you there's a whole bunch of bundled reports that don't even require that you get into modifying the metadata. But then I'll also show you that modifying that metadata is not as complex as it may seem. The metadata access to the ERwin metadata is actually via an ODBC DSN named ERwin_R8. There's also an ERwin R8 current, which is the currently open model, and this is how we actually access the metadata in the tool. By the way, if you are if you've used Access in the past, or if you've used Microsoft Excel in the past to export metadata from you know, a data source, you can use that as well. So if that's your preferred tool for reporting, you can definitely do exactly what I'm going to show you here within the context of Crystal. You could do an almost identical process in the Excel tool to generate this as well. So remember, this is just an open source ODBC, and it allows users to access the data that's within that metadata repository. So let me show you a couple of techniques. So first of all, let me take a step back and show you where you can just run reports from without having to do any kind of editing and understanding of the ERwin metadata. So technique number one, of course, we have pinned reports. This is available from the Tools menu, pinned reports, and this simply allows me to generate either graphical or non-graphical reports of ERwin metadata. So for example, there's some bundled reports. These come with the tool. I can generate a graphical report of my physical design by clicking that button, and Crystal Reports takes a moment to come up and running. My PC's been a little slow today, so it might take longer than usual. There we go. And we see that I immediately get a graphical report of the diagram. So there's, you know, I have different entities reported here. I have the views listed. I can add, there's additional reports here that have more granularity in this report, but I also see, you know, just very quickly, I've generated a report of the actual, you know, diagram itself here as well. So that's the first report I wanted to mention, is that, you know, being able to see this real basic report of the graphical report of the diagram by publishing right from one click, just a bundled report inside the ERwin software. I'm going to exit that. Now I'm back in just the ERwin interface. But also additionally, we have the ability of, I could generate like a diagram picture, for example. In this case, rather than showing just the current diagram, which is what I did there, you actually have the ability of being more selective. So I might want the entity display and that same DBA view display that I had there, and I could generate this as well. So it's another technique for generating these reports. So here's the entity view, for example. And that's another technique. So once again, you know, and by the way, you may ask, well, how do I publish this out to my end users? This is Crystal Reports Viewer. It's a free tool. Any user can download it, but you can also very easily do a file export to PDF or to a Word document, for example, or as an RTF file if you just want to send it to a non-Word users, although doc files will open in most text editors as well, or actually Word editors. So, so that's another way to access our metadata. So these are bundled reports. There's no reason to that we can't use those bundled reports. Once again, like I mentioned before, I actually prefer to generate just the graphical images and you know, make them available in a shared folder. This way I can now refresh that without having to generate a bunch of PDFs in the future or something like that. So, there are pinned reports if you want to use it that way. Very simple. You can just execute them from here. But there are additional reports. We might want my logical physical combined dictionary, which is a bundled report as well. So this is just like my data dictionary, my logical entity names, my physical table names. And like we saw before, Crystal allows interaction here, so I can actually go in and say I want to run a report at the model level. It's the only subject area I currently have in the diagram. And I could specify whether I want to use logical order, physical order, or maybe alphabetical order for my entity and table or entity and attribute displays. So after I've specified that, I end up here with, of course, my entity names in alphabetical order, the table names in alphabetical order. So if these, in this case, they match, but you can imagine they were different. My definitions are listed here, and additional values. So what is the attribute name? What is its definition? What's the physical name for that same object? What's its data type? Is it nullable or not? What's the primary key membership? What's the foreign? Is it a foreign key member? And we go and you see that we have an entire list of values here. So we can go from table to table and see this data dictionary that we've quickly generated just once again with the click of a button. So I want to be clear at this point that all these reports that I'm doing at this point are just bundled reports. These are simply reports that come right out of the box with ERwin. There's no need to customize the reporting at all. I'll show you a couple more of these, but then I'm going to show you where we can actually start really getting our hands into the guts of the tool and start to customize the reporting that we generate. So more pinned reports. You see that we have like the inherited state of attributes. We have the different types of values of, showing us like the relationship between attributes, whether there's an inheritance link between, a column in one table and another, et cetera, and other features here as well. So we have a limited number of subject area of reports here. Each release of ERwin has been adding a few more as customers have requested them. If you have requested reports, make sure to, or if you wish to see certain reports, make sure to request from the support team. They have been adding reports with every release of ERwin, so they're going to add additional pinned reports. If you do create a custom report, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment, you can actually save them for reuse. As a matter of fact, I customized my data dictionary report here. I've inserted my initials into it just so I know what it is, and I've actually saved it back. And of course, after I edited it and saved it, it was available for me for reuse in the future. And of course, you can also share it with other team members. So remember to use your pinned reports. A lot of these reports already contain the metadata you're looking for. So that's my second, best practice in a way is remember to use the pinned reports. It's probably giving you something or something similar to what you're trying to create. My best practice number 3 is don't forget the bulk editor. So if you are just trying to generate a tabular report of the metadata in your diagram, don't forget that you have the new bulk editor tool in ERwin and that you have the ability of creating these reports. If you do not see this bulk editor tool by default, and I think in most instances when you install ERwin, you don't see it. So if you do not see it currently, go to View, Windows, and turn on the bulk editor. Or you could just hit the Control and the letter B, like boy or bulk editor. You could just hit B and Control B, and that will bring this tab to the fore. And you can then use this bulk editor tool. So what does the bulk editor tool allow us to do? I did a whole webinar on this. There's a lot of features you can do with the bulk editor. I'm just going to introduce it briefly so users know that it's aware. Users that may not be aware of it learn a little bit about it. But you, if you want to know a lot more about this, make sure to catch the replay of my bulk editor webinar from, I think it was December. So in these, so this report here, what you can do is the bulk editor tool actually allows us to generate, let's say, a column report. I can specify exactly which properties I want, so it could be comment and physical data type, the null option, of course, physical data type, physical name, and did I put in definition? I put comment and definition, let's say, the logical definition. That's the difference between comment and definition. Which object instance, you'll see a little red flag here. It means that I need to populate this field, the column field. And I can modify display order. By the way, if you've created custom reports that you want to generate on a regular basis, you can save these for reuse. So remember, always save these. If you have a certain report you want to run over and over again, there's no reason to have to keep recreating this. Either save it as an XML file, which lets you use it across multiple diagrams, or save it into the current model so it's available for you to use the next time you access the model. So we can specify display order, but that doesn't really matter because we can actually change this later. And in our user settings, we have some settings here. If you want to know what these settings do, you just hit the F1 key. Remember, anytime you're in ERwin, if you want to know exactly what's going on in the particular editor you're looking at, you hit F1 within the context of the editor, and you get context-specific help. So remember, that is another tech tip for everybody. Hit F1 when you need when in doubt, hit F1, basically. So click the Edit button. And when we do the edit, you'll see we end up with our report. So my table name actually ended up in the third row. I'm going to put in the first. I can actually sort by table name, sort by column name and table name. And you'll see I have the definitions. I have physical data types, null, option, and comment. Now, for the context of this webinar, the only thing I really want to focus on is that we've generated a tabular report very quickly, and I can actually export this out to as a CSV file by just clicking on the Save button here. So just core functionality, Save as CSV, and that lets me send out my tabular report to other end users. Pretty straightforward. There's a lot of other functionality here. I'm going to touch on it very, very briefly here, but for example, you can export this. Users can modify it externally. You can import it back in after modification and update your model metadata. You can filter here. So maybe I'm looking for a particular column within my report. So I'm looking for version date. I've located it. I want to now edit this object. I can either edit it here. You can update the data type, change the nullability on it, or I can open the. I can actually open the editor for that object, make my change here within the editor, and then exit out of it. So I actually call this like a modeling dashboard. So it allows me to create one report, and via that one report, access all the metadata in my model very conveniently. So that's another key point. So before I get into creating custom reports, using Gris reports, and everything else, I don't want people to kind of overlook what's already there. We have the pinned reports. A lot of those will give you the reports you're already looking for. No reason to go and build them from scratch. You have the ability of using the bulk editor here to generate a tabular report of almost any model metadata that you want. So a very convenient way of doing so. There's other features here. I'm not going to go into them in too much detail. Like I said, I have a whole webinar on it. I recommend you check that out if this sounds interesting to you. And it could be maybe the most convenient way of generating these reports to your end users. So with that out of the way, let's get into the meat of the presentation, and that's really looking at how do we get into accessing this ERwin model metadata and customizing it. So I've introduced some resources for you. There is a diagram that contains the model structures available to you. It's in the install directory of the ERwin software. You can go in there and start looking at the actual metadata, links, or I should say the joins between the tables from entity to attribute to subject area, etc. Much more conveniently, a much more filtered view of that in the documentation I showed you before, the ODBC reference guide and the metadata reference guide. Two great resources for anybody who needs to generate these reports. And not only are there already reports in those documents that are going to give you a lot of the metadata reports you're looking for, but there's a whole other report set here that is not really published in any way, and I want to show you where that is available for you. And what you can do is invoke the query tool in ERwin. So this is something that was introduced in ERwin 7. If you go to your tools, query tool, this gives us a query tool that allows us to connect to any ODBC client. So there's two really nice features about this. One is it allows us to, for example, I could connect I can connect to this AdventureWorks model that I have open back here and run a query on one of these joins while I'm looking at the graphical design. So this is a method where I could actually connect to this actual source itself to run a query. Another thing I can do is run ERwin metadata reports. And this is really the same way that all those pinned reports that I showed you before, the way they're being run is against queries against the ERwin metadata. So the way we do that is rather than connecting to an external data source, connect to a database, which is what we would do if you wanted to connect to these actual database that we've reverse engineered previously, I can actually click here and do a connect to ERwin ODBC. By clicking that button, I've basically connected to the native ERwin metadata. Now I want to execute a report. Maybe I'm looking for particular column properties and I don't know how to access that information. I want to build a data dictionary to my specifications. Now, I would tell you that almost every single time that I have needed to create one of these reports, it's been available to me within one of these, and these kind of secret reports that for some reason are not published, or maybe I know why they're not published, but they're available to you in the install folder of the ERwin install folder. So it's ERwin Data Modeler R8. I have multiple installs of ERwin, but for the most of you out there, you're just going to see this R8 folder. And you'll see that there is a folder called ODBC Reports, and there's another subfolder called Unsupported Sample Reports. Now, these are actually saved as SQL files, so the default file type here is QRY query. But if you change this to all reports, what you're going to see here is a whole bunch of reports that are going to probably give you a lot of the metadata that you're looking for. So for example, I have a report I can run here that would have my column reports, attribute, column information, entity, constraints. Maybe, I'm not sure if that's the one I was looking for. Logical, physical, column information. I think this is the one I was looking for. So I have this query here, and you see that the query actually opens up. So you see here, it's a pretty complex query, obviously, but not that hard to follow when you see how these referenced, how these values are being referenced. So this is table name, column name, etc. But more importantly than kind of seeing this as a sandbox to start to manipulate the metadata in the model, you can actually just simply run it. And once we run the report, we see here, for example, I have my table name and my column names and the data type and the nullability and the column data type parent and validation rules and default values, entities and attribute properties, etc. So it's a pretty robust set of properties on this report. So simply by having this exported, this report set exported, I can now just export it as a CSV. So it's just clicking this button right here. I have the ability of now saving this as a CSV file. So if you just wanted to create a tabular report that looked like this, or if you want to start playing with the metadata, add a couple of metadata tags, like I mentioned, reference the some of that the documentation I mentioned before, and you could basically just do an additional join with an additional set of view properties. In this case, we're querying a model of a view, so we can actually just add an additional couple of properties here, and by simply adding an additional couple of properties in from the select statement here, we can add additional fields that we want to, in the future for populating the diagram. So this is a very simple way. This query itself could give us a tabular report of what we want. Very simple way of generating it. This tabular report can be executed inside of an Excel via the connection to the ERwin ODBC. I can literally copy and paste this into the Excel ODBC editor, generate it inside of Excel. Simple enough. I can also modify this. Once I get a little more adept, I can say, okay, I've already included physical name. Pretty straightforward. What do you think the value of physical name is? It's the physical name. Physical data type, physical data type. Null option, right? Pretty straightforward what these values represent within the context of the ERwin diagram. And if there were additional values I wanted to add, I can add them here as well. So once you get a little more adept at adding this metadata, we already have the joins properly defined across the entity to attribute to view definitions, etc. Since I already have the hard part done, which is the joining, I can now just simply add additional queries here, like I want physical name and logical name. I want physical data type and logical data type, or any other value. So it's pretty straightforward in being able to add a couple of additional values to an existing report. So that's another key takeaway. Look in this once again. I just want to show you where it is. It's in the within the ERwin install folder. There's a folder called ODBC reports, and it's called unsupported sample reports. The reason I think that you don't hear a lot about this is that these are queries that were simply ported over from earlier versions of ERwin. I have found that they're not supported in case they don't execute properly, but I have found that basically every single one of them executes properly or with a minor modification. So if you do happen to stumble upon one of these queries and they don't actually execute, drop me an email, and I probably by adding one letter to the query, because maybe the metadata table that it's referencing has changed slightly in naming, it will execute properly. So let me know. You don't have to do the legwork by yourself. But one of these queries will probably give you the results that you're looking for. Now, if we've actually generated this as a tabular report, but I actually want to go and format this much more nicely than just having a big tabular report, maybe I want to format this like those Crystal reports that we saw previously. Or maybe I have a template in Crystal reports that I want to use. Is there a convenient way of getting this information out into Crystal reports? Let me show you how you would actually do that. So like I mentioned before, Crystal Reports, ERwin comes with a full developer version of Crystal Reports. You can launch it from your Start menu, or you can launch it right there from Tools in the ERwin tool, like I just did right there. This opens my Crystal Report software. You see I actually have my recent report. I actually have that revised data dictionary editor here. And what I'm going to show you here is how you're going to build a new report from scratch that would go and add or build a new report from the same query that I just showed you in the other software. So the way you do that is I just click on New Report. This prompts me my database expert. I'm going to connect to ERwin R8 current. This is the currently open ERwin R8 model, which is the same exact. By the way, this is behind the scenes, but it's the exact same connection that ERwin internally is using when I invoke that editor. So I'm going to connect to that editor. You can actually navigate and build a report schema object by schema object. So I can go in there and look for my entity table. Right? So there's the attribute table. I can include the entity table. I can do a join across the two tables. I can build it one column at a time. That's definitely something you can do, but I've already covered that topic in the previous version of this webinar, so I don't want to cover it here. I want to show you something a little bit different. So, but you can always catch that replay if it sounds interesting to you. So in this case, what I'm going to do is take one of the existing queries and build a brand new report from it. I click the Add Command button. I click the arrow, and basically it's telling me to, add what SQL query in the box below if I want to invoke it. So the way I do that is I copy the same report that I actually had in this query editor before. And there's multiple ways I can access this. Obviously, it's just text. I'm just going to happen to use the same editor I used before, just to for continuity's sake. It was the logical and physical column information. So I can actually take this, and I'm just copying it, just using Control-C, and I'm going to paste it in here. So it's the exact same query, and I'm going to click the Create button. I'm going to click the OK button, actually, not the Create button. And now I have this command. I can actually rename it to make it something useful. It could be like, column properties. And I click OK. Contain the combination carrots. Oh, why not? Let's see. Edit the command. It's taking the comment out to see if that's why it's complaining about the syntax. and click OK. Actually, you know what? I think the problem was that I put a space when I renamed it. Actually, it had nothing to do with the syntax itself. So this is the command. You notice it forced the renaming that back to command. But more importantly is that I see here that I have all of the table name, all the columns in that query have come in here. Now, within this editor, I can simply drag and drop these fields into my editor. Oops, I put it in the wrong field. I'm just going to do Control-Z because I often paste it into the wrong area. I actually want to paste it into this details area, and you see it automatically populates the header with the table name. And then within here, I can also put my column information. And now I'm just going to preview my print preview this, and you see how it's starting to build this report. Now, there's a lot more I can do, of course. I'm going to undo both of those changes and show you when we go back to our design, we can go here and create groups. So I have my table name group. I'll click OK. I'm going to create another group, and I'm going to call it, it's going to be my column name. Okay. And we can actually start to go in here and create these groupings as well, and this basically allows us to have a more formatted view of the data. So here I have now my table, and now I see these columns breaking out in a separate view. I've basically just dragged the grouping over so that they have a more, so I can actually start build this tabular view. And I could do many other things now. I can actually start putting in my column properties at the same level as the column. Or maybe I want to put them within another grouping. Maybe I want to have additional groupings that way as well. And I'm going to print preview it again. And we start seeing now the data types as well. So, I can include header information. I can embed a logo for my company. I can put in a URL, things like that. So it becomes very quickly customizable simply by having this query around, and I can basically just drag and drop it into Crystal Reports. So I know Crystal Reports can be intimidating, but a lot of these design elements are simply dragging from one area into another and just right-clicking embedding objects. So it's really not as complicated as it may seem. Now, this is an advanced reporting webinar, so I do have one more thing I want to show before we get into your questions, and hopefully we'll have a few questions at least. And the last thing I wanted to show that I didn't get a chance to show previously is that a lot of users were wondering what happened with the queries that used to run against the model manager, because users used to like to play with those queries to extract metadata against the model manager. So for users who are not using the model manager or what's called the Workgroup Edition now, it basically allows you to have a central storage of your ERwin diagrams. And then in so doing so, you can actually run these reports against batches of diagrams. So you can actually say, okay, well, I want to know where does customer exist across all my diagrams, or all the diagrams in a particular library. So it becomes a useful way. Obviously that's a really best practice. If you do share or store your models centrally, you can report on them centrally. But there are MART reports. They're only available when I'm connected to the model manager, which I currently am, and that's why this is available. But if you wanted to go and actually edit one of these reports, so you want to say, okay, here's a diagram report, here's a global report, let's say, where I have my library, models, and entities. So I click on that link, and the Crystal Reports viewer will pop open, and it will show me here's my libraries, here's my models, and here's all the entities within there. There's another one that even has attribute information, et cetera, and so forth. So it becomes a really convenient way of doing this. But what if you wanted to know, hey, I'd like to know how does ERwin actually compile this information? Maybe I want to get more familiar with the model manager metadata, which is very different, by the way, than the ERwin metadata. So maybe I want to become more familiar with that. How do I have access to this? You actually can. ERwin is using Crystal Reports to do this as well. The way you can invoke this query is by going to Edit, and then we do Edit Design. And this will open this report in Crystal Reports in the full development studio. Okay. It just says that it's currently open for editing, which is fine. And you'll see that there are fields that are available here. Once again, we see command, just like we saw in the previous version of this reporting that I showed you before. To be able to see the query as it's being executed against the database, right-click on the command button, go to Database Expert. This is basically walking backwards to this editor. In the previous example, we started with this editor and worked forward. In this example, we're working backwards to the same point. And I can actually go to this command and view, I could do edit command here. I could have done a view actually, because edit might ask me to connect to the repository. Might take a minute here to try to connect. Here we go. Yeah, that's what I was expecting it to ask me to do. I should have just done a view so we could just see the actual SQL query itself. This might force me to connect. It's basically going to force me to put in my model manager credentials. So I'm actually just going to type these in. Databases, MM82. I'll log in as SA. There we go. So what this actually is showing me here is this is the query that's being run against the database. So here's how I request the library object. Here's how I get the diagram information. Here's how I get the entity information on this by filtering on an entity class, basically. And that's what this value is here. So this, like I said, very different, much more difficult metadata to get a grasp of. It's basically a huge bucket of metadata, and then we filter on classes. But if you want to understand, there's notation there to explain this is what the entity class is, it's this value here, et cetera, and so forth. So if you want a deeper dive, you want to understand the model manager metadata, these queries will probably give you the values you're looking for, like I'd like to know diagram information, I'd like to know attributes within diagrams, entities, et cetera. And you can actually do that by selecting the edit option for these queries, and then you get those values. So with that, the last thing I want to mention as far as reporting features and advanced reporting features, and this is something that I, once again, can't do a much deeper dive into, but there is now a web-based method of accessing your metadata. And that's actually something called the web portal. So ERwin now has this web portal tool, and basically allows us to publish to the web, basically give access to your metadata to your end users via just a web tool, and then without having to actually have ERwin installed. So anybody who's interested in that, there's a whole webinar on that topic, and let me know if that's interesting to anybody, and we can follow up at that point. So that's like my last topic of showing you this. I'll just show you quickly how this looks. It's an interactive view of your metadata. You can zoom in on it. You can see object properties. You can have there's a search tool here, so you can actually search for particular tables, for example. So a simple way of actually being able to publish this out to your end users. So that's yet another advanced reporting feature, and it's something that's new in ERwin. It is a separate tool, but if you are actually someone who is, for example, has invested in ERwin Navigator, it's a comparable price point as Navigator. So if you're curious about that, I have a webinar on the topic, and if you want to get pricing on it, reach out to us, and we can facilitate that as well. So with that, we can jump into our, see if there's any questions. So I'm just going to wrap up and wait for any questions to come in if there are any. Be sure to use your resources in conclusion. Use existing reports as starting points for future reports as well. Every copy of ERwin comes with Crystal reports, remember that. And the model manager metadata is available as well. So anybody who wants to get more familiar with what's going on in the model manager, if you are a model manager user, remember that those metadata reports are available as well. And simply by invoking the Crystal reports editor, you can access them. Make sure to contact me. And with that, we'll open it up to any questions we might have. I know we're coming up right on the end. So I don't see any questions in the queue. So thank you for attending, and I hope this was useful. And we'll see you with the next topic next month. Take care, everybody.